I never thought I would end up here, standing outside my own son's house on Christmas Eve, my hands trembling as I rang the doorbell. The wreath on the door was perfect, covered in gold ribbons and fresh pine, the kind of decoration I used to make when Marcus was little. Back then, we didn't have much money, but I always made sure Christmas felt magical for him. The door opened, and there he was. My son. 32 years old now, wearing an expensive sweater I knew cost more than my monthly rent. His face shifted when he saw me. That mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite name. Disappointment, maybe. Or shame. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I brought you something for Christmas." I held out a small wrapped package, the paper wrinkled because I had to reuse it from last year. Inside was a photo album I had put together, filled with pictures from his childhood. It had taken me 3 months to save enough money to get the photos printed at the pharmacy. He didn't take it. Behind him, I could see his wife, Jennifer, standing in the hallway with their 2 children. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon wafted through the open door, reminding me I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Marcus said, his voice tight. "I wanted to see you. It's Christmas Eve, and I thought maybe we could spend some time together. I haven't seen the kids since their birthday party in June." "That's because you embarrassed us, Mom. You showed up in those old clothes, talking about your problems to everyone. Jennifer's parents were there." His words stung, but I tried to keep my composure. "I know things have been difficult, but I'm still your mother. I raised you by myself after your father left. I worked 3 jobs to put you through college. And I'm grateful for that," Marcus said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "But you need to understand. We have a life here. We have standards to maintain. My colleagues live in this neighborhood." Standards. The word hung in the air between us like a wall. Jennifer appeared behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, maybe we should let her come in for a few minutes." "No," he said firmly. "Mom, I think it's better if you leave." "But it's Christmas," I said. And I hated how desperate I sounded. Then his face hardened in a way I had never seen before. "Go beg on the streets, you bum," he said, his voice loud enough that I saw curtains moving in the neighbor's window. "You're not welcome here." The door slammed in my face. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the wrapped gift still in my hands, the cold December wind cutting through my thin coat. Inside, I could hear laughter and music, the sound of a family celebrating together. I walked away from that house with tears freezing on my cheeks, and I made a decision. I would not let this destroy me. I would not become the person my son seemed to think I was. My name is Catherine Morgan, and this is the story of how I lost everything and found myself again. 6 months earlier, my life had been completely different. I was working as a secretary at a small law firm downtown, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. I had a modest apartment in a decent neighborhood, and while I didn't have much, I had my dignity. Then the firm merged with a larger company. They said they were streamlining operations, which is corporate language for firing people. At 58 years old, I suddenly found myself unemployed with bills piling up and savings that evaporated faster than I could have imagined. I applied for jobs everywhere: coffee shops, retail stores, office positions. But every interview ended the same way. "We'll let you know. We decided to go with someone else. We're looking for someone with more recent experience." What they meant was someone younger. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday afternoon. I had 60 days to vacate the premises. I sold everything I could: furniture, books, my mother's china set that I had promised myself I would never part with. But it wasn't enough. I ended up in a women's shelter on Maple Street. The building was old, the paint peeling, the smell of industrial cleaner mixed with desperation. My bed was a narrow cot in a room I shared with 5 other women. At night, I would lie awake listening to their breathing, their occasional sobs, wondering how I had ended up here. My roommate was a woman named Patricia, probably 10 years younger than me, with tired eyes and a nervous habit of picking at her fingernails. She had been a nurse until a car accident left her with chronic pain and an addiction to the medication that was supposed to help her. First time Patricia asked me one evening as we sat in the common area. I nodded. "It gets easier," she said. Not better, but easier. I didn't want it to get easier. I didn't want to accept this as my reality. The shelter had rules. You had to be out by 8 in the morning and couldn't return until 6 in the evening. During the day, I walked the streets looking for work, filling out applications on library computers, sitting in coffee shops making a single cup of tea last for hours. That's where I met Eleanor. She was sitting at a table near the window, sketching in a worn notebook. Her hands were weathered and covered in paint stains, her gray hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked up and caught me staring. "You're welcome to sit," she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "You look like you could use some company." I hesitated, then sat down. "I'm not very good company these days." "None of us are, dear. That's why we need each other." Eleanor was 73 years old and had been an art teacher for 40 years before retiring. Her husband had passed away 5 years ago, and she spent her days drawing and painting in coffee shops around the city. "Why not paint at home?" I asked. "Too quiet," she said. "Too many memories. Out here, I feel alive." We started meeting regularly. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I would find Eleanor at the same coffee shop, and we would talk. She told me stories about her students, about the husband she still missed every day, about the art she created not for money or recognition, but because it made her feel like herself. "What did you do before?" Eleanor asked me one day. "I raised a son," I said. "I worked. I paid my bills. I thought I was doing everything right. And now? Now my son won't even let me in his house." Eleanor put down her pencil and looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. "That must hurt terribly." "It does." "So what are you going to do about it?" The question caught me off guard. What can I do? "I'm living in a shelter. I can't find work. I have nothing to offer him." "That's not what I asked," Eleanor said. "I asked what you're going to do about the hurt. Are you going to let it define you, or are you going to use it?" I didn't understand what she meant then, but her words stayed with me. The next week, Eleanor brought me a gift. It was a blank journal, the cover a soft leather that had aged beautifully. "Write your story," she said. "Not for anyone else, for yourself. Write about who you were, who you are, and who you want to become." "I'm not a writer," I protested. "You don't have to be. You just have to be honest." That night, in the shelter, while Patricia snored softly in the bed next to mine, I opened the journal and started to write. At first, the words came slowly, painfully, but then they began to flow. I wrote about my childhood, growing up poor in rural Kentucky, my mother cleaning houses to feed us. I wrote about meeting Marcus's father, about the hope I had felt, about the devastation when he left us when Marcus was only 3 years old. I wrote about the years of struggle, working multiple jobs while trying to be present for my son. The school plays I missed because I was working. The times we ate rice and beans for dinner 3 nights in a row because that was all we could afford. The way Marcus would hug me anyway and tell me I was the best mom in the world. I wrote about watching him grow up, watching him become successful, watching him move into a world I didn't understand. The expensive dinners where I didn't know which fork to use. The conversations about investments and real estate that left me feeling small and ignorant. The gradual distance that grew between us, so subtle I didn't notice until it was a chasm. And I wrote about that Christmas Eve, about standing on his doorstep and hearing those words, "Go beg on the streets, you bum." The writing became therapy. Every night I filled pages with my thoughts, my fears, my memories. And slowly, something began to shift inside me. One morning at the shelter, Diane, the director, approached me in the common area. "Catherine, can I speak with you for a moment?" My heart sank. Had I broken some rule? Was I being asked to leave? "We have a program," Diane said, sitting down across from me. "It's for women who want to get back on their feet. Job training, resume building, interview preparation. I think you would be perfect for it." "I've been applying for jobs for months," I said. "No one wants to hire someone my age." "That's because you're applying for the wrong jobs," Diane said. "You have skills, Catherine. You have experience. You just need to repackage them." The program met 3 times a week. There were 12 women in the group, ranging in age from 25 to 63. We came from different backgrounds, but we all shared the same determination to rebuild our lives. Our instructor was a woman named Rita, a former executive who had lost everything in a divorce and spent 2 years homeless before clawing her way back. She was tough, no nonsense, but also deeply compassionate. "Your age is not a liability," Rita told us in the first session. "It's an asset. You have experience, wisdom, resilience. The trick is making employers see that. She taught us how to write resumes that highlighted our strengths, how to address gaps in employment, how to present ourselves with confidence in interviews, how to negotiate for fair wages. But more than that, she taught us how to believe in ourselves again. One exercise required us to write down our accomplishments, not just professional achievements, but everything. Rita walked around the room as we worked, stopping at my table. "What did you write, Catherine?" "I raised a successful son by myself," I said quietly. "I kept us fed and housed and safe even when I had almost nothing. I taught him the value of education and hard work." Rita nodded. "Those are incredible accomplishments. Don't minimize them. You managed a household on a tight budget, which is financial management. You juggled multiple jobs, which is time management and adaptability. You invested in your child's education, which shows long-term strategic thinking. Do you see how your experience translates? I had never thought of it that way." Through the program, I learned about a position at a nonprofit organization that helped low-income families with financial literacy. They were looking for someone to teach budgeting and resource management. The irony wasn't lost on me, teaching others how to manage money when I was living in a shelter. But Rita encouraged me to apply. "You know what it's like to stretch every dollar," she said. "You know what real families face. That makes you qualified, not disqualified." The interview was terrifying. I sat across from the hiring manager, a kind-faced woman named Susan, and tried to remember everything Rita had taught us. "Tell me why you're interested in this position," Susan said. I took a deep breath. "Because I've lived it. I know what it's like to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. I know what it's like to feel ashamed when you can't afford what everyone else seems to have. And I know that with the right information and support, people can make their situations better. I want to be that support for others." Susan leaned forward. "That's a powerful answer. Tell me more about your experience." I told her about raising Marcus alone, about managing a household on minimum wage, about the strategies I had developed for making ends meet. I even told her about my current situation, living in a shelter, because Rita had taught us that honesty and vulnerability could be strengths. When I finished, Susan was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. "When can you start?" I got the job. It was part-time and the pay was modest, but it was a start. More than that, it gave me purpose again. My first client was a young mother named Gabriela. She was 26, with 2 small children and a husband who had just lost his job. She sat in my office with her hands clutched in her lap, trying not to cry. "I don't know what to do," Gabriela said. "We're going to lose our apartment." I pulled out a worksheet. "Let's start by looking at what you have coming in and what's going out." Sometimes when we see everything written down, solutions become clearer. We worked together for an hour, going through her expenses line by line. I showed her resources she didn't know existed: food banks, assistance programs, community resources. I helped her prioritize her bills and create a plan to talk to her landlord about a payment arrangement. When she left, she hugged me. "Thank you," she said. "You made me feel like maybe things will be okay." That hug meant more to me than any paycheck ever had. As weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild. The nonprofit increased my hours to full-time. I saved enough money to move out of the shelter and into a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much, just 1 room with a kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was mine. Eleanor helped me move in, bringing a painting she had made, a landscape of mountains at sunrise. "For new beginnings," she said, hanging it on the wall. I continued to see Eleanor regularly. Our coffee shop meetings had become sacred time, a space where I could be honest about my struggles and my hopes. "Have you thought about reaching out to Marcus again?" Eleanor asked me one afternoon. "Every day," I admitted. "But I don't know what to say. He made it clear he doesn't want me in his life." "Maybe he was scared," Eleanor suggested. "Sometimes when we see our parents struggling, it reminds us of our own vulnerability. Maybe he needs time. Or maybe he just meant what he said." Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not the same person who stood on his doorstep that night. You've grown. You've changed. Maybe it's time to show him that." But I wasn't ready. Not yet. My work at the nonprofit expanded. Susan, my supervisor, recognized my ability to connect with clients and asked if I would be interested in developing a workshop series for the community. We need someone who can talk about financial management in a way that doesn't feel condescending or out of touch, Susan said. You have that gift. I created a 6-week workshop called Real Money, Real Life. We covered budgeting, saving, dealing with debt, and building credit. But more than that, we created a community. The participants shared their struggles and successes, supported each other, celebrated small victories. One evening, a woman in her 40s approached me after class. Her name was Michelle. I just want to thank you, Michelle said. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in my car. Today, I signed a lease on an apartment. This class taught me I wasn't stupid or lazy. I just needed tools and a plan. Hearing her story, I realized something profound. My own struggles, my own pain, had not been meaningless. They had prepared me for this work, given me empathy and understanding I could never have learned any other way. A year after that terrible Christmas Eve, I received an unexpected letter. It was forwarded from the shelter where I had once lived. The envelope was expensive, cream-colored paper with Marcus's return address embossed in the corner. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a card with a simple message written in his careful handwriting. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking this past year. What I said to you was unforgivable. I was cruel and heartless, and I've regretted it every single day. If you're willing, I would like to see you. I want to try to make things right. Please call me. Marcus. I set the card down and cried, not from sadness, but from the complexity of emotions flooding through me. Relief, anger, hope, fear, all tangled together. I showed the letter to Eleanor at our next meeting. What do you want to do? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me wants to call him immediately. Part of me wants to throw this letter away. Both of those feelings are valid, Eleanor said. But ask yourself this. If you don't reach out, will you regret it? And if you do reach out, what do you need from him to move forward? I thought about her questions for days. I wrote in my journal, filling pages with my conflicting emotions. And finally, I picked up the phone and called. Marcus answered on the second ring. Mom? Hi, sweetie, I said. And my voice broke a little on the words. There was a long silence. Then I heard him crying on the other end of the line. Mom, I'm so sorry. I've been so sorry. What I said, what I did, there's no excuse. I took a deep breath. No, there isn't. You hurt me more than I can express. But I'm willing to listen if you're willing to be honest with me. We talked for over an hour. Marcus told me that he had been ashamed of where I was in my life, but more than that, he had been terrified. Terrified that he might end up in the same situation. Terrified that his success wasn't as solid as he pretended. Terrified that if he acknowledged my struggles, he would have to confront his own fears about stability and security. I was cruel because I was scared, he said, and that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I told him about the past year. About the shelter, about Eleanor, about my job at the nonprofit, about the workshops I was teaching. I told him that losing everything had been devastating, but it had also taught me who I really was beneath all the roles I had played. When we finished talking, we agreed to meet for lunch the following week. That lunch was awkward at first. We met at a small restaurant downtown, neutral territory. Marcus looked older somehow, tired. He had brought photos of his children, and we looked through them together. They ask about you, he said. Emma wanted to know why you never visit anymore. What did you tell her? That I made a mistake. That Grandma and I had a disagreement. But we're working on fixing it. Are we? I asked. Are we really working on fixing it? Marcus looked up from the photos. I want to. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try to earn it back. Forgiveness isn't something you earn, I said slowly. It's something I choose to give. But trust, respect, a real relationship, those things do have to be earned. I understand, he said. I'll do whatever it takes. Over the following months, Marcus and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. We met for lunch every other week. He came to one of my workshops and sat in the back, listening. Afterwards, he approached me with tears in his eyes. I had no idea, he said. I had no idea how much you went through when I was growing up. I always knew we didn't have much money. But I didn't understand the constant stress, the impossible choices. I didn't want you to understand, I said. I wanted you to be a kid. You sacrificed everything for me, Marcus said. And when you needed help, I turned my back on you. How can you even stand to look at me? Because you're my son, I said simply. Because people make mistakes. Because you're trying to make it right. That matters. Jennifer reached out to me separately. She invited me to coffee, just the two of us. I almost said no, remembering how she had stood behind Marcus that night, silent while he shamed me. But I went. She started crying before I even sat down. I should have said something, Jennifer said. That night, I should have insisted he let you in. I should have stood up for you. I was a coward, and I'm ashamed. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid of making things worse. Because I always defer to Marcus in family matters. Because I took the easy way out, and I'm sorry. Her honesty disarmed me. I appreciate you saying that. We talked for a long time. Jennifer told me about her own mother, who had struggled with addiction and had been in and out of her life. She said that watching Marcus reject me had forced her to confront her own relationship with her mother. Your grace through all of this has inspired me to reach out to her, Jennifer said. We haven't spoken in 5 years, but I'm going to call her this week. The second Christmas Eve came, and this time I was invited to Marcus and Jennifer's home. This time, I walked through the front door and was greeted with hugs and warmth. Grandma, Emma shouted, running to me. She was 7 now, full of energy and missing her 2 front teeth. Hello, beautiful girl, I said, scooping her up. The house was full of people. Jennifer's parents were there, and they greeted me warmly, with no trace of the judgment I had feared. Marcus's best friend from college was there with his family, and to my surprise, Eleanor was there. Marcus invited me, Eleanor said, giving me a hug. I hope that's okay. It's more than okay, I said, my eyes filling with tears. Dinner was chaotic and loud and perfect. At one point, Marcus stood up and clinked his glass. I want to make a toast, he said. His voice was shaky. A year ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I turned away someone who had never turned away from me. Mom, you've shown me what real strength looks like. You've shown me grace and forgiveness I didn't deserve. You've built a new life not through bitterness but through service to others. I'm proud to be your son, and I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that I should be. He raised his glass. To my mom. To second chances. To family. Everyone echoed the toast, and I wiped tears from my cheeks. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed and most of the guests had left, Marcus and I sat together in his living room. The Christmas tree lights twinkled softly, and the house was quiet. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you forgive me? How did you not hate me? I thought about his question carefully. Because hate would have destroyed me, not you. Because I remember who you were before you said those words. And because I believe people can change. You're proving that. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I'm setting up a scholarship fund, he said, for single mothers going back to school, in your name, the Catherine Morgan Scholarship. I stared at him. Marcus, you don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to. You sacrifice so much for my education. I want to help other mothers who are doing the same thing. That's beautiful, I said. Thank you. He looked at me seriously. I'm also wondering if you would consider being on the board. You have experience and perspective we need. I would be honored. As I drove home that night, back to my small studio apartment, I thought about the journey of the past year. I had lost so much. My home, my security, my relationship with my son. But I had gained something too. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed. I had found purpose in helping others. I had learned that my worth wasn't determined by my bank account or my circumstances. The following Monday, I was at the nonprofit preparing for my evening workshop when Susan called me into her office. Catherine, I need to talk to you about something, she said. We've received a grant to expand our services, and we want to hire a program director to oversee all our financial literacy initiatives. I'd like you to consider applying for the position. I was stunned. Me? Susan, I only have a year of experience here. You have a lifetime of experience, she corrected. You understand our clients because you've been where they are. You've built our most successful program from scratch. You have the skills and the heart for this work. Please think about it. I thought about it, and I applied. The interview process was rigorous, but this time I walked in with confidence. I knew my worth. I knew what I had to offer. I got the position. Along with it came a salary that allowed me to move into a bigger apartment and start rebuilding my savings. But more importantly, it gave me the opportunity to expand the work I loved. Over the next 2 years, our programs grew. We added workshops on credit building, home ownership, small business development. We partnered with local schools to teach financial literacy to teenagers. We created a mentorship program connecting people who had overcome financial hardship with others who were still struggling. Eleanor continued to be a constant presence in my life. She started teaching an art therapy class at the nonprofit, helping clients express their emotions through creativity. "You saved my life," I told her one day as we set up her classroom. Eleanor laughed. "No, dear. You saved your own life. I just reminded you that you could." My relationship with Marcus continued to heal and grow. He and Jennifer made sure I was included in family events. I spent every Sunday afternoon with my grandchildren, taking them to parks and museums and ice cream shops. Emma told everyone at school that her grandma was a superhero who helped people. The Catherine Morgan Scholarship awarded its first recipients, 3 single mothers who were going back to school. At the award ceremony, I met each of them and heard their stories. One was escaping an abusive relationship. One was recovering from addiction. One had been homeless. All of them were fighting for better futures for themselves and their children. As I listened to them speak, I saw myself in each of their faces, and I understood that my pain had not been wasted. It had been transformed into something that could help others. One recipient, a woman named Tasha, approached me after the ceremony. "I read about your story in the program," she said, "about how you were living in a shelter just 3 years ago. That gave me hope. If you could turn your life around, maybe I can too." "You will," I told her. "I believe in you." On the 3rd Christmas Eve since that terrible night, I hosted dinner at my apartment. It was bigger now, a 2-bedroom place with enough room for a dining table that could seat 8. Marcus and his family came, along with Jennifer's parents. Eleanor was there, of course. And I had invited Patricia, my former roommate from the shelter, who was now 9 months sober and working as a certified nursing assistant. As we sat around the table, eating the turkey I had roasted and the sides everyone had contributed, I looked at the faces of the people I loved. My son, who had learned humility and grace. My daughter-in-law, who had found the courage to reconnect with her own mother. My grandchildren, who would grow up knowing that mistakes could be forgiven and relationships could be mended. Eleanor, who had shown me that friendship could bloom in the darkest times. Patricia, who proved that redemption was always possible. Before we ate, Emma asked if she could say grace. We held hands around the table as her small voice filled the room. "Thank you for this food and for our family. Thank you for second chances. Thank you for Grandma, who teaches people how to be strong. Amen." "Amen," we all echoed. After dinner, as I was cleaning up in the kitchen, Marcus came to help me. "Mom," he said quietly as we washed dishes side by side, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For not giving up. On yourself. On me. On us." I turned to look at him. "You're my son. I could never give up on you. Even after what I said? Even after how I treated you? Especially then," I said, "because that's when you needed me most, even if you couldn't see it." Marcus set down the dish he was drying and hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and my journal. I opened to a blank page and began to write. 3 years ago, I stood on my son's doorstep and heard him tell me to go beg on the streets. 3 years ago, I lost everything I thought defined me. 3 years ago, I wanted to give up. But I didn't give up. I fell apart, yes. I struggled and stumbled and doubted myself. But I kept moving forward. One day at a time. One small step after another. I learned that losing everything material doesn't mean losing everything that matters. I learned that my worth isn't determined by my job title or my bank balance. I learned that vulnerability can be a strength and that asking for help isn't weakness. I learned that the worst moments of our lives can become the catalyst for our greatest transformations. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start over. At 60 years old, I built a new life from nothing. I found work that matters. I repaired a broken relationship with my son. I made a difference in people's lives. I closed the journal and looked at Eleanor's painting on the wall, the mountains at sunrise, symbolizing new beginnings. Then I looked at a photo on the mantel, one Jennifer had taken at Thanksgiving. It showed me surrounded by my family, all of us laughing. I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago, broken and defeated on her son's doorstep. I wished I could go back and tell her that everything would be okay, that the pain she was feeling would transform into purpose, that the rejection would lead to redemption. But maybe I didn't need to go back and tell her. Maybe she knew, somewhere deep inside, that she was stronger than her circumstances. Maybe that strength had been there all along, waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. The next morning, I woke early and made coffee. I had a workshop to prepare for, clients to meet with, lives to touch. As I got ready for work, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me had gray hair and wrinkles, evidence of 60 years of life. But she also had clear eyes and a confident posture. She looked like someone who had been broken and had put herself back together, stronger at the broken places. She looked like a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had learned that the end of one story could be the beginning of another. I smiled at my reflection. Then I grabbed my coat and headed out the door, ready to face whatever the day would bring. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all. No matter how dark the night, no matter how impossible the circumstances, no matter how deep the pain, there is always hope for a new beginning. Always the possibility of transformation. Always the chance to write a better ending to your story. And sometimes, the worst thing that ever happens to you becomes the thing that saves you. The journey hadn't been linear, of course. There were moments I wanted to give up. Days when the weight of everything felt unbearable. I remember one particularly difficult morning about 6 months after I started living in the shelter. I woke up with a fever and a cough that rattled in my chest. I felt terrible, but I had no sick days to take because I didn't have a job. I couldn't afford to see a doctor. And worst of all, I had to leave the shelter by 8 in the morning regardless of how I felt. Patricia noticed I was ill and brought me some cold medicine she had been saving. "You should rest today," she said, concern evident in her eyes. "Where?" I asked. "I can't stay here, and I have nowhere else to go." "Come with me," Patricia said. She took me to a day center run by a church a few blocks away. It was a place where homeless people could spend the day indoors, have a hot meal, and access basic services. I had avoided going there before, telling myself I wasn't really homeless, I was just temporarily displaced. But that day, too sick to care about pride, I went. The center was in a church basement, the walls painted a cheerful yellow that contrasted with the worn furniture and tired faces of the people gathered there. A volunteer named Michael greeted us at the door. "Welcome," he said warmly. "There's coffee and donuts if you'd like some. And we have a nurse who comes in on Tuesdays if you need to see someone." It was a Tuesday. The nurse, a retired woman named Helen, examined me in a small private room. "Bronchitis," she said after listening to my lungs. "You need antibiotics and rest." "I can't afford antibiotics," I told her. Helen made some calls and managed to get me a prescription at no cost through a program for low-income patients. She also insisted I spend the day resting on one of the couches in the back room. "I'll check on you every hour," she said firmly. "And if you get worse, we're taking you to the emergency room." I slept most of that day, waking periodically to find Helen checking my temperature, or Patricia bringing me water. When I woke fully around 4 in the afternoon, I felt marginally better. Michael sat down next to me with a cup of tea. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," I said. "Thank you for letting me stay." "That's what we're here for," Michael said. He paused, then asked, "What's your story, if you don't mind me asking?" I found myself telling him everything. About Marcus, about losing my job and my apartment, about the shelter. Michael listened without judgment, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he said something that surprised me. "You know, you're not alone in this. There are so many people going through similar struggles. Good people who worked hard their whole lives and suddenly find themselves with nothing. It's not your fault." "It feels like my fault," I admitted. "That's what society wants you to think," Michael said. "Because if you blame yourself, you won't question the systems that failed you. But the truth is, we live in a country where one medical emergency or job loss can destroy someone financially. That's not a personal failing. That's a broken system. His words gave me a different perspective. I had been carrying so much shame, believing I had somehow failed at life. But maybe, just maybe, I was simply a victim of circumstances largely beyond my control. I started going to the day center regularly after that. Not just because it gave me a warm place to spend the day, but because I found community there. I met Jorge, a former construction worker who had been injured on the job and lost everything while fighting with insurance companies. I met Linda, a teacher who had a mental health crisis and lost her position. I met Raymond, a veteran struggling with PTSD who couldn't hold down a job. Each person had a story. Each person was more than their circumstances. And being around them reminded me that I was more than mine too. It was at the day center that I first heard about the job training program at the shelter. Linda mentioned it to me one afternoon. "You should check it out, Catherine," she said. "You're smart and capable. This program could really help you." I had been hesitant about the program because it felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that I needed help. But after my conversation with Michael, I realized that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. That decision to join the program changed everything. But even after I started the program, even after I began to see possibilities again, there were still dark days. I remember the day I saw Marcus and his family at the mall. It was about 4 months after that Christmas Eve, and I was there using a gift card Eleanor had given me to buy some new clothes for job interviews. I was coming out of a store when I saw them. Marcus pushing a stroller with his youngest, Jennifer holding Emma's hand. My heart stopped. Part of me wanted to run to them. Part of me wanted to hide. Before I could decide, Emma saw me. "Grandma!" she shouted, breaking free from Jennifer's grip and running toward me. Marcus's face went white. Jennifer looked stricken. But Emma didn't notice any of that. She just threw her arms around me. "I missed you, Grandma. Where have you been?" I knelt down to her level, my eyes filling with tears. "I've been busy, sweetheart, but I've missed you too." Marcus approached slowly. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "Hi, Marcus." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the sounds of the mall fading into background noise. Finally, Jennifer spoke. "Emma, why don't we go get that ice cream we talked about? Let Daddy and Grandma talk for a minute." Emma protested, but eventually left with Jennifer. Marcus and I were left standing there, two people who shared so much history and now shared mostly pain. "Mom, he started, then stopped. "It's okay," I said. "You don't have to say anything." "No, I do," Marcus said. "What I did, what I said, it haunts me every day. But I don't know how to fix it." "You start by being honest," I said. "Why did you do it, Marcus? Was it really just about being embarrassed?" Marcus looked away, his jaw tight. "I was scared," he finally said. "Scared that if I helped you, I'd end up like you. Scared that my success wasn't as secure as I pretended. Scared that if my colleagues knew my mother was homeless, they'd see me differently. And that fear made me cruel." His honesty was painful to hear, but it was also a gift. At least I knew the truth. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. "I don't forgive you yet, Marcus. I'm not there. But I appreciate your honesty." "What can I do?" he asked desperately. "How can I make this right?" "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But you can start by letting Emma know that Grandma loves her. Don't keep me away from my grandchildren because of your mistakes." Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Okay, I can do that." That encounter stayed with me for weeks. I replayed it over and over in my mind, analyzing every word, every expression. I talked about it in therapy. Yes, I had started seeing a counselor through a free program at the day center, and she helped me process my complicated feelings. "It's normal to have mixed emotions," my therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, told me. "You can be hurt by what he did and still love him. You can be angry and still want reconciliation. Those feelings don't contradict each other." Dr. Chen had become another important person in my journey. She was a psychologist who volunteered her time to work with people experiencing homelessness. In our sessions, she helped me understand that my worth wasn't tied to my circumstances or to my son's acceptance of me. "You are valuable because you exist," Dr. Chen would say. "Not because of what you do or what you have or who loves you. Your inherent worth as a human being is not up for debate." Those words were revolutionary to me. I had spent my entire life measuring my value by what I could provide to others. I was a good mother because I sacrificed for my son. I was a good employee because I worked hard. I was a good person because I helped others. But Dr. Chen was telling me I had value simply by existing, regardless of what I did or didn't do. Learning to internalize that concept took time. There were days I believed it and days I didn't. But slowly, gradually, it began to take root. Around this time, Eleanor introduced me to her art group. Every Saturday morning, a group of artists met at the community center to paint together. Eleanor had been telling them about me and insisted I come. "I'm not an artist," I protested. "Everyone is an artist," Eleanor said. "You just have to give yourself permission to create." That first Saturday, I sat at a table with a blank canvas in front of me and no idea what to do. The other artists, a mix of ages and skill levels, were already painting, their brushes moving with confidence. "What should I paint?" I whispered to Eleanor. "Whatever you feel," she said simply. I picked up a brush and dipped it in blue paint. I didn't have a plan. I just started making marks on the canvas. Blue swirls that became a river. Gray shapes that became rocks. Green strokes that became trees. I painted for 2 hours, losing myself in the process. When I stepped back to look at what I had created, I was surprised. It wasn't technically skilled, but it had emotion. It showed a river flowing through a rocky landscape, moving forward despite obstacles. "That's beautiful, Catherine," Eleanor said, standing beside me. "That's your journey right there." I started going to the art group every Saturday. Painting became a form of meditation for me, a way to express feelings I didn't have words for. I painted my anger in red slashes. I painted my hope in golden sunrises. I painted my loneliness in empty rooms and my growing strength in trees that bent but didn't break. The group embraced me completely. They didn't care that I was living in a shelter or that I was new to painting. They just cared about the art and about supporting each other. In that studio, surrounded by the smell of paint and the sound of brushes on canvas, I felt like myself again. Not someone's mother or someone's employee or someone experiencing homelessness. Just Catherine, a woman who was learning to create beauty from pain. One of the artists, a man named David who was probably 70 years old, noticed that I always painted alone, never talking to the others while I worked. "You know, it's okay to let people in," he said to me one day. "I'm just focused on the painting," I replied. David smiled. "I did the same thing when I first came here, 5 years ago. My wife had just died, and I didn't think I wanted friends. I thought I just wanted to paint. But eventually, I realized that connection was part of the healing too." His words resonated with me. I had been so focused on being independent, on not needing anyone, that I had isolated myself. But humans aren't meant to be alone. We heal in community. After that, I started opening up to the other artists. I shared my story with them. They shared theirs with me. I learned that David's wife had died of cancer after 52 years of marriage. That Maria, a woman in her 40s, was painting as part of her recovery from addiction. That James, a college student, was dealing with anxiety and depression and found relief in art. We were all broken in different ways. We were all finding our way back to wholeness. And we were doing it together. The months continued to pass. I completed the job training program and got the position at the nonprofit. I moved out of the shelter and into my studio apartment, small victories that felt monumental. My first night in my own apartment, I sat on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet, eating takeout Chinese food, and I cried. But this time, they were tears of relief and gratitude. I had a door I could lock, a bathroom I didn't have to share with 5 other people, a kitchen where I could cook. It was the smallest studio apartment in probably the worst neighborhood in the city, but it was mine. Eleanor helped me furnish it. She took me to thrift stores and garage sales, teaching me to see the potential in worn pieces. "Look at this dresser," she said, running her hand over a scratched wooden piece. "A little sanding, some paint, and it will be beautiful. Everything deserves a second chance, Catherine, including furniture, including people." We spent weekends refinishing furniture together. Eleanor would tell me stories about her life while we worked, about growing up during World War II, about meeting her husband at a USO dance, about teaching art to thousands of students over 4 decades, about the grief that nearly destroyed her when he died. "I didn't think I would survive losing him," Eleanor admitted one day, We had been together for 47 years. When he died, I didn't know who I was without him. But you did survive, I said. Yes, but not by accident. I made a choice. Every day I chose to get out of bed. I chose to keep painting. I chose to find meaning and connection. Some days that choice was harder than others, but I kept making it. Her words reminded me that survival was an active choice. I wasn't just passively enduring my circumstances. I was actively choosing to move forward, to grow, to heal. That realization was empowering. At the nonprofit, my work continued to evolve. After 6 months in the position, Susan called me into her office again. Catherine, we've had incredible feedback on your workshops. Attendance has tripled since you took over the program. Participants are achieving their financial goals. We're getting calls from other organizations asking if you can train their staff on your approach. That's wonderful, I said, not sure where she was going with this. I want to send you to a national conference on financial literacy, Susan said. It's in Chicago next month. The organization will cover all your expenses. I think you could learn a lot, and honestly, I think you have a lot to teach others in this field. Me? Go to a conference? I had never been to anything like that. You're a professional now, Catherine. You deserve to be in those spaces. The conference was intimidating at first. I walked into the hotel conference center surrounded by people in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases. I felt like an imposter in my thrift store blazer. But then I reminded myself of what Dr. Chen had taught me. My worth wasn't determined by what I wore or where I came from. It was inherent. I attended workshops on innovative teaching methods, on reaching underserved populations, on measuring program outcomes. But the most valuable part of the conference was the connections I made. I met other educators who were passionate about financial literacy. I exchanged ideas and strategies. I learned that my approach, grounded in lived experience and empathy, was actually unique and valuable. On the last day of the conference, I was asked to participate in a panel discussion about reaching hard-to-serve populations. I almost said no, convinced I had nothing to contribute. But then I thought about all the clients I had worked with, all the people whose lives had been changed by someone who understood their struggles. I said yes. Sitting on that panel, speaking into a microphone in front of 200 people, I told my story. I talked about being homeless, about living in a shelter, about the shame and fear and desperation. And then I talked about how that experience made me better at my job, not worse. How it gave me credibility and empathy that couldn't be taught. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone was applauding. After the panel, people lined up to talk to me, to get my contact information, to tell me their own stories. A woman probably 10 years younger than me approached with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I've been working in this field for 15 years, and I've always felt like I had to hide my past. I grew up in poverty. I experienced homelessness as a child. I thought if people knew, they wouldn't respect me professionally. But hearing you own your story, that gives me courage to own mine. Your story is your superpower," I told her. "Don't hide it." Flying home from that conference, looking out the airplane window at the clouds below, I realized how far I had come. 2 years ago, I had been sleeping on a cot in a shelter, believing my life was over. Now I was a professional speaking at national conferences, helping others, building something meaningful. But the journey wasn't over. There was still the unfinished business with Marcus. After our encounter at the mall, Marcus had kept his promise. He started inviting me to see the kids, awkward supervised visits at parks and museums. The first few visits were painful, both of us being overly polite, unsure how to navigate this damaged relationship. But gradually we began to relax with each other. Emma was old enough to notice that something was different between her father and me. "Why don't you come to our house anymore, Grandma?" she asked me one day at the zoo. "Your daddy and I had a disagreement," I said carefully. "But we're working on it." "Did you fight?" "Yes, we did. My mommy says people who love each other sometimes fight, but they always make up," Emma said with the wisdom of a 7-year-old. "Your mommy is right." "So are you and Daddy going to make up?" I looked at Marcus, who was pretending to be very interested in the penguin exhibit, but was clearly listening to our conversation. "I hope so, sweetie. I really hope so." That evening, after I dropped Emma off at their house, Marcus walked me to my car. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Really talk?" We went to a coffee shop and sat in a corner booth. For the first time since that terrible Christmas Eve, we had an honest conversation about what had happened and what we both needed to move forward. I need you to understand how much you hurt me, I said. I need you to understand that you didn't just turn me away from your house. You rejected me at my lowest point. You saw me struggling and you called me a bum and told me to beg on the streets. Your words made me feel worthless. Marcus listened, tears streaming down his face. You're right. I was cruel. There's no excuse for what I said. I also need you to understand that I'm not a charity case, I continued. I don't need you to rescue me. I'm rebuilding my life on my own terms. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be based on mutual respect, not pity. I respect you more than anyone I know, Marcus said. Mom, when I see what you've accomplished, how you've turned your life around, I'm in awe. You're stronger than I could ever be. Then treat me like I'm strong, I said. Don't coddle me. Don't try to fix everything. Just be my son. We talked for 3 hours that night, working through years of misunderstandings and hurt. We talked about how I had sometimes made him feel guilty about our struggles when he was growing up, never intentionally, but the message had been there. We talked about how he had always felt pressure to be successful enough for both of us, to make up for what I had sacrificed. We talked about fear and shame and love and forgiveness. By the end of that conversation, something had shifted. We weren't fixed, not yet, but we were on our way. Marcus started therapy, something he admitted he should have done years ago. He worked through his issues around money and success and his complicated feelings about his childhood. Jennifer did too, dealing with her own family trauma. And slowly, carefully, we rebuilt our relationship. Not the old relationship, where I was the struggling single mother and he was the successful son who felt guilty, but a new relationship between two adults who loved each other and were learning to communicate honestly. The invitation to Christmas dinner came in November. Marcus called me, not texted, to ask if I would join them. I want you there, Mom. We all do. Please say yes. I said yes, though I was nervous. The memories of the previous Christmas Eve were still so vivid, still so painful. But when I arrived at their house that second Christmas Eve, everything was different. Marcus greeted me at the door with a hug. Jennifer welcomed me warmly. Emma and her younger brother, Liam, ran to me with excitement. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and I felt for the first time in years like I truly belonged. As we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at my family. At Marcus, who had learned humility and compassion through his mistakes. At Jennifer, who had become someone I genuinely liked and respected. At my grandchildren, who would grow up knowing that love was stronger than any mistake. And I felt overwhelming gratitude. After dinner, Marcus gave me a gift. It was a framed photograph of us from when he was about 5 years old. In the picture, we were at a park, both of us laughing, his small hand in mine. I found this while going through old photos, Marcus said. It reminded me of who we were before everything got complicated. Of how much you loved me, how much you sacrificed. I never want to forget that again. I held the frame, looking at the image of that younger version of myself. She looked tired, but happy. She had no idea what was coming, the struggles, the heartbreak, the loss. But she also had no idea about the strength she would discover, the life she would build, the person she would become. Thank you, I whispered, hugging my son. Thank you for remembering. That night, driving home, I thought about the concept of redemption. For so long, I had thought redemption meant going back to how things were before. But real redemption wasn't about restoration to a previous state. It was about transformation into something new, something that incorporated both the pain and the growth. I wasn't the same person who had stood on Marcus's doorstep 2 years ago. I was stronger, wiser, more compassionate. I had learned what I was capable of when everything was stripped away. I had learned that I could lose everything external and still not lose myself. The work at the nonprofit continued to expand. We secured additional funding, and I hired staff to help with the growing programs. One of my first hires was Gabriella, the young mother who had been my first client. She had completed her own education and training and wanted to help others the way I had helped her. You changed my life, Catherine, she told me on her first day. You saw me when I felt invisible. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I want to do that for others. Watching her work with clients, Seeing her use her own experiences to connect with and inspire them, I realized this was the real impact of my work. It wasn't just about teaching budgeting skills. It was about helping people see their own worth and potential. The scholarship fund that Marcus had established grew. By the third year, we were able to support 15 students. We held an annual dinner where scholarship recipients could share their stories, and I never missed one. Hearing these women talk about their dreams, their struggles, their determination, I saw myself reflected in each of them. At one of these dinners, a recipient named Jasmine approached me after giving her speech. She was in her 30s, getting a degree in social work while raising 3 children alone. "I just want you to know," Jasmine said, "that when I learned about your story, about how you went from being homeless to running programs that help thousands of people, it changed something in me. I realized that my current circumstances don't define my future. Thank you for being proof that transformation is possible." Her words reminded me why all the struggle had been worth it. Every difficult day, every moment of doubt, every time I wanted to give up but didn't, it all led to this, to being able to light the way for others. Eleanor remained a constant in my life, my dear friend who had seen me at my lowest and celebrated every victory. We still met at the coffee shop every Tuesday and Thursday, though now I could afford to buy her coffee too, which delighted me. One Tuesday, Eleanor came to our meeting with something to tell me. "Catherine, I've been diagnosed with cancer," she said, her voice steady. "Pancreatic. Stage 4. They're saying maybe 6 months." The world seemed to stop. "Eleanor, no. It's okay, dear. I'm 81 years old. I've had a beautiful life. And honestly, I'm not afraid. But I need you," I said, tears streaming down my face. "You saved me, Eleanor." She reached across the table and took my hand. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just kept you company along the way. And I'll keep being here as long as I can." The next 6 months were precious and painful. I visited Eleanor as often as she would allow. We painted together when she had the energy. We talked about art and life and death and meaning. She made me promise that I would keep painting after she was gone, that I would stay connected to the art community she had introduced me to. Near the end, when she was in hospice care, I sat by her bedside holding her hand. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Eleanor asked, her voice weak. "What?" "That I got to witness your transformation. That I got to see you rise from the ashes and become who you were always meant to be. That's been one of the great honors of my life. You gave me hope when I had none," I told her through tears. "You showed me that it was possible to create beauty even in the darkest times." Eleanor smiled. "That's what art does, Catherine. And that's what you do. You help people create beautiful lives from difficult circumstances. Keep doing that. Promise me." "I promise." Eleanor died peacefully 2 days later, surrounded by her nieces and nephews and the friends she had collected over her long, rich life. At her memorial service, the church was packed with former students, fellow artists, and people whose lives she had touched. When it was my turn to speak, I talked about how this remarkable woman had saved my life by teaching me I was worth saving. After she died, I inherited her paint supplies and several of her paintings. I hung them in my apartment and in my office, constant reminders of the woman who had shown me such kindness. The grief of losing Eleanor was profound, but it was different from other losses I had experienced. This wasn't the desperate, lonely grief I had felt after Marcus rejected me. This was grief mixed with gratitude, sadness mixed with celebration of a life well lived. Eleanor had taught me that even endings could be beautiful if they were approached with grace. Life continued to move forward. I was promoted to executive director of the nonprofit when Susan retired. The job came with more responsibility and a salary that allowed me to move into a nicer apartment, one with 2 bedrooms and a small balcony where I could sit and watch the sunset. Marcus and I had fully reconciled. We had family dinners every Sunday, alternating between his house and mine. Emma and Liam called me every week just to chat. Jennifer and I had developed our own friendship, sometimes meeting for lunch without Marcus, just the 2 of us. One afternoon, Jennifer confessed something to me. "You know, when Marcus first told me about what happened that Christmas Eve, about what he said to you, I was horrified. But I also understood it. I had done something similar to my own mother, not exactly the same, but I had pushed her away because her struggles reminded me of parts of myself I didn't want to acknowledge. It's hard to face our parents' humanity, I said. We want them to be invincible. But they're not, Jennifer said. They're just people doing their best. And sometimes their best isn't enough, not because they're failures, but because life is hard. I wish I had understood that sooner. You understand it now, I said. That's what matters. Jennifer had reconnected with her mother, who was now 6 years sober. Watching their relationship heal inspired me. It showed that it was never too late for reconciliation, never too late to choose love over fear. On the 5th anniversary of that terrible Christmas Eve, I did something symbolic. I took the journal Eleanor had given me, now filled with years of entries, and I read through it from beginning to end. I read about the pain and fear and desperation of those early days. I read about small victories and setbacks. I read about growth and change and gradual healing. Then I started a new journal. On the first page I wrote, "This is the story of what comes after survival. This is the story of thriving." Because I was thriving, my work had impacted thousands of people. The programs I had developed were being replicated in other cities. I was regularly invited to speak at conferences and training sessions. I had written articles about financial literacy and trauma-informed teaching that had been published in professional journals. But more than professional success, I had personal peace. I had genuine friendships. I had a loving relationship with my son and his family. I had a life that felt meaningful and rich, not because of what I had accumulated, but because of who I had become and how I showed up in the world. I started mentoring other women who were rebuilding their lives after hardship. One of them was Tasha, the scholarship recipient who had approached me at that first ceremony. She had graduated with her degree in accounting and was now working at a firm downtown. But she called me regularly, especially when she faced challenges. "I don't belong here, Catherine," she told me one day. "Everyone else has these fancy degrees from expensive universities. They wear designer clothes and talk about their trust funds. I feel like an imposter." "I know that feeling," I said. "But here's what I've learned. Your path to get where you are was harder than theirs. You had to overcome more obstacles. That doesn't make you less qualified. It makes you more impressive. You earned your place at that table. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." My words to Tasha were words I had learned to say to myself. The old Catherine would have minimized her accomplishments, would have felt grateful just to be in the room. The new Catherine knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. Marcus also grew in visible ways. He became more involved in community service, volunteering at organizations that helped struggling families. He served on boards of nonprofits. He used his business skills to help people who needed it. And he talked openly about his past mistakes, about what he had learned from them. One evening, he and I were having dinner at his house when he said something that surprised me. "Mom, I've been thinking about writing about our story, about what happened and how we got through it. I think it could help other people who are dealing with fractured family relationships." "Are you comfortable with that?" I asked. "Only if you are. It's your story too." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to keep our pain private, but part of me recognized that our story had the power to help others, to show that relationships could be repaired, that mistakes didn't have to be permanent, that transformation was always possible. "Let's do it together," I said. "We'll write it honestly, including the painful parts." We spent months working on that project, meeting weekly to write and edit and remember. It was harder than I expected, revisiting those dark times. But it was also healing, seeing how far we had both come. When we finished, Marcus wanted to have the piece published in a magazine. It appeared 6 months later in a national publication, accompanied by photos of us together. The response was overwhelming. We received hundreds of emails and messages from people sharing their own stories of family estrangement and reconciliation. People who had made similar mistakes to Marcus and were looking for ways to make amends. People who had been hurt like I had been and were trying to forgive. One message in particular stayed with me. It was from a woman named Andrea whose daughter had cut her out of her life. She wrote, "I read your story and cried for 2 hours. I had given up hope that my daughter and I would ever speak again. But your story showed me that healing is possible. I'm going to try one more time to reach out. Thank you for giving me hope." That's the power of sharing our stories. Our pain, when transformed into purpose, can light the way for others. As years passed, my life continued to evolve in beautiful ways. I published a book about financial literacy and resilience, drawing on my experiences and the lessons I had learned. I traveled around the country giving talks and leading workshops. I was interviewed on podcasts and television programs, not because I was famous, but because my story resonated with so many people. But I never forgot where I came from. I still volunteered at the shelter where I had once lived, teaching workshops and mentoring women. I still went to the day center where Michael and Helen and Patricia had shown me kindness. I believed in giving back to the places and people that had helped me survive. Patricia and I remained close friends. She had been sober for 7 years now and was working as a nurse again. We met for lunch once a month, and she never failed to remind me of how far we had both come. "Remember that first night in the shelter?" she would say. "Remember how scared we were? I remember you giving me cold medicine even though you had so little yourself," I would reply. "I remember your kindness." One day, Patricia called me with news. She had been offered a job as a nurse at the shelter where we had lived. She would be providing medical care to women in exactly the situation we had once been in. "It feels like coming full circle," she told me. "Like I get to be for other people what people were for me when I needed it most." "That's beautiful," I said. "And it's the best possible outcome, not just surviving but turning around and pulling others up with you." As I approached my 65th birthday, I reflected on the journey I had taken. From secretary to unemployed, to homeless, to shelter resident, to social service worker, to executive director, to author and speaker. From broken to healing to whole. From victim to survivor to thriver to helper. But more important than any title or achievement was the internal journey. From self-doubt to self-compassion. From shame to pride. From isolation to connection. From despair to hope. On my 65th birthday, Marcus and Jennifer threw me a party. Not just a family dinner, but a real celebration with dozens of people. My colleagues from the nonprofit were there, former clients who had become friends, people from my art group, friends I had made along the way, and most precious of all, my family. Marcus and Jennifer and Emma and Liam, who was now 8 years old. Emma, now 15 and wise beyond her years, gave a speech that made everyone cry. "My Grandma Catherine is my hero," she said. "Not because she never fell down, but because she always got back up. She taught me that mistakes don't define you, and that it's never too late to change your story. She taught me that kindness and resilience are the most important things you can possess. And she taught me, through her example, that your worth isn't measured by what you have or what you've lost, but by who you choose to be." I looked around that room at all these people who had been part of my journey, and I felt overwhelming gratitude. This was wealth. Not money in a bank account, but connections forged in fire. Not possessions, but experiences. Not success as the world measures it, but significance as the heart recognizes it. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Marcus pulled me aside. "Mom, there's something I need to say. I've said I'm sorry 100 times, but I don't know if I've ever properly thanked you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For showing me what real strength looks like. For forgiving me when I didn't deserve it. For being the kind of person I want to be when I grow up." I laughed through my tears. "Marcus, you're 42 years old. And I'm still learning from my mom," he said. "I hope I always will be." That night, back in my apartment, I sat at my small desk and opened my journal. I wrote about the party, about the love I felt, about the gratitude that filled my heart. And then I wrote something else. To the woman I was 5 years ago, standing on her son's doorstep in the cold, hearing words that nearly destroyed her. You survived. You more than survived. You transformed your pain into purpose. You took the worst moment of your life and used it as a catalyst for becoming the person you were always meant to be. You learned that you are enough, that you have always been enough, that your worth is not determined by your circumstances or anyone else's opinion of you. You learned that endings can be beginnings, that falling apart can be the first step in putting yourself back together, stronger and more whole than before. You did that. You did the impossible. And I'm so proud of you. I closed the journal and looked around my apartment, at Eleanor's paintings on the walls, at the photos of my family on the mantle, at the books I had written on the shelf, at the evidence of a life rebuilt from nothing. The journey from that cold Christmas Eve to this moment had been long and painful and beautiful. I had lost everything and discovered that everything could be rebuilt. I had hit bottom and learned that bottoms can be foundations for something new. I had been rejected and learned that my value didn't depend on anyone's acceptance. Most importantly, I had learned that transformation is always possible, that it's never too late to change your story, that the end of one chapter doesn't mean the end of the book. The woman who stood on that doorstep 5 years ago thought her life was over. But she was wrong. Her real life, her truest life, was just beginning. And what a beautiful life it turned out to be.